Alia Tadichebi, Sonza Taringi Doling Utsushugi. Good evening, folks. Thank you for joining us here today on our two-day series of Youth and Buddhism event hosted by North America's Sakyamulam Foundation with His Eminence Asanga Vajra Rinpoche on day 1 and His Eminence Avikrita Vajra Rinpoche on day 2. The themes of the two-day series of Youth and Buddhisms are day 1, survival. To contextualize Tibetan youth and their complexities, it's to give context of what the current picture of Tibetan youth is and how their everyday life are. It's to cover themes of complexity of identity, intergenerational trauma, mental health, anxiety, pressures of an immigrant lifestyle and integrating in their lives here. And day 2, our theme is thrival, resilience and flourishment of Tibetan youth, understanding how to thrive. How do we navigate life with the context from day 1 through attention, stress coping mechanisms, discipline? How do we stay motivated? How do we practice mindfulness? What does it mean to have mental well-being? These themes were developed from you folks, from the registration link that informed what your interests were. So today's programming will follow this agenda, starting with introductory remarks by His Eminence Asanga Rinpoche, followed by a moderated discussion, and then the floor will be open for Q&A from all of you folks. This program will be in English. However, folks are welcome to ask their questions in Tibetan or English. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome His Eminence Asanga Vajra Rinpoche, who is one of the leading figures in the new generation of Sakya scholars, practitioners, and teachers. In 2021, Rinpoche launched the Sakya History Resources Project, an educational initiative to shed light on the golden spiritual and political history of Pande Sakya tradition of the Tibetan Buddhism. This is for the modern audience in Tibetan, English, and various other languages. So without further ado, please welcome His Eminence Asanga Vajra Rinpoche for introductory remarks.
Thomadelaya Tungsermjen Nambani Dan Teganashi Damakusha Namba Teshi Puribinda Yonlaya Tsamtashiteles Shui That Harindi Chushedi Tanda Chang Ari Basage Zamnishide Melam Sobegi Tanda Regushuva Tardu Tanda Samalaya Kodewu Yongwe Chedu Inge Tone Shui Chebi. So first of all, I would like to offer my greetings to all of the Tibetans, both the elders and the young that have gathered here. As requested by the North American Sakya World Peace Malam Foundation, I will be giving a talk on several selected topics chosen by many of you here, and so I will be addressing those issues. So I'll try to not give any long answers, but try to give the sort of like a nutshell of all the and answer very short, simple answers to all of your questions. So for the first, which is mental health, this is a very important issue. It may be a bit new, a sort of a new concept to the Tibetan community, because it wasn't really a thing back in the old Tibet, but it is very important nowadays, and it's important to address it because it is a real thing. So the way I will provide an answer to this is I was thinking that it might be better to give an answer from a Buddhist perspective, because a general sort of answer anyone can give, such as a therapist, and there are many knowledgeable people who can give or provide very excellent answers to these sort of issues. So I will provide it from a Buddhist perspective. So in Buddhism, mental health is very important. There isn't the actual word called mental health in the Buddhist scriptures, but in Buddhism we put a very strong emphasis on the mind, the state of the mind. This is very important. His Holiness the 42nd Sage Tenzin Rinpoche has mentioned earlier that without the right motivation, nothing can become the Dharma, and one cannot practice the Dharma correctly. So therefore, whatever we do, not just Dharma, but anything we do in our lives, it should be with a good mental state. Without a good mental state, everything will be rocky in life. So therefore, we need to address this issue, whether we're Buddhists or not. It's for everyone, and the elders especially need to be open to this kind of issue. And of course, the younger ones, all of you, should also feel comfortable to share your mental health issues with your parents or your friends. You should not keep it to yourself. You should not lock those emotions stored away deep down your heart, but you should share it with others, because there are so many people out there, even though you may not know, who actually care for you, and you will only figure out that by sharing it with them. So you should certainly feel comfortable to share these issues with others, and they will certainly help you with that. And in the Buddhist perspective especially, the mind is in control of the actions of the body and the speech. So whether we do good, it is dependent on the mind, and whether we do bad, it is also dependent on the mind. So without a good mental state, Dharma practice is not possible. So therefore, the mind is the most important. Secondly, for the complexity of identity, to address that issue, many of us who are here in the West might certainly be facing such issues of identity crisis, especially because our surrounding area and people are not really of a Tibetan not really Tibetan surroundings. It is the Western surroundings, so therefore our environment. So therefore, how do we keep a balance? How do we identify or recognize our identity and be proud of it while living in a society where the dominant culture or people are not Tibetan? How do we do that? Well, I think it is quite simple, especially here in Toronto, because there's so many Tibetans here, and compared to many other places in the United States or in Canada, I have heard that Toronto has the most Tibetan people. So I think it should be especially easy to keep your traditions alive, because each of you are there to support each other. So that is the situation we have. So therefore, that is the advantage of being in Toronto. We have a lot of Tibetans. And so the main thing we need to do is that when we are outside of our home, when we're not dealing with Tibetans, of course we can, we will have to speak English. We don't really need to do what the Tibetans usually do, or the customs and all of that. But at home, it is very important to speak Tibetan, and with your parents especially. If you don't speak Tibetan at your home, you will of course not likely be speaking Tibetan outside of your home, so then there will not really be a chance to speak Tibetan at all. So the best place to speak Tibetan or learn Tibetan is at your home. And the best parents or the best teachers to learn Tibetan from are your parents. So therefore I'd like to take this opportunity to request the parents to take great care and attention to providing your children with a sense of being a Tibetan, and also for the children and the younger teenagers, and to pay attention and try to see the importance of preserving your culture. And one way to be proud of your identity, of being a Tibetan, is to know about your history, the hardships which the elders, your parents, your ancestors, and all of the Tibetans have gone through in times of past. Right now, things are going much smoother, it's much easier. Everyone does not have to suffer as much as our ancestors or our parents had to back in the day. It is thanks to their kindness that we are living a very happy life. But everyone has a story to tell, and the story of our ancestors, our parents, is full of hardships. Having to lose our country and to seek refuge in foreign countries, and the challenges of preserving our culture in these foreign countries. There's so many hardships that they went through, and so you should try to learn from them. I myself often like to interview the elders, because they have some knowledge to share, stories to tell, which can be beneficial for future generations if we can learn from them. So I take notes, I interview them, take notes, and then put it into writing. And then it's there in writing. So if we're gone, maybe our children, our grandchildren, they have something to know about. So this is quite important. As for intergenerational trauma, yes, this is probably connected with what I just mentioned of the hardships that our parents and they had to go through. So, and sometimes that also affects us if the parents don't know how to deal with trauma. And so the trauma can be passed down like a disease. But I think it is good to have healthy conversations, discussions with your parents and the elders. And whatever it is, the past should be forgiven, but not forgotten. So that is the main point. As for anxiety or pressure of integrating into Western society, this is actually, I think I just answered that in a way, so I will not answer that again. As for how to deal with overthinking, I'll give you a very simple answer to that. For myself, I usually like to bring to mind one of the writings of the great Indian master Shantideva in his Way of the Bodhisattva. He wrote, "Kaldechus yunani tela mega jishiyu, kaldechus menani tela mega chejipens." So I find this to be very useful in our daily lives. So a translation of that quote would be, if the problem can be solved, why worry? If the problem cannot be solved, worrying will do you no good. So it's as simple as that. Now, for the importance of Buddhism in modern society, this is quite an important topic to address. So many innovators and business people, and there are many people and inventors, and there's so many people in the world who create technology, modern technology, which is advancing at every moment. And these technology gadgets, or whatever they may be, are aimed mainly to reduce the complications in our life, to make our life more happy and to make things easier for us without us having to put much effort into working hard to obtain some happiness. But as it is very noticeable, the modern technology is only able to bring a sense of peace to our minds, which is only temporary. It is not able to provide any everlasting happiness or peace. This is very clear. whatever technology we use, it is pleasant, it gives us some sense of peace or joy, but it doesn't always secure our happiness. We have something which we call the suffering of change in Buddhism. So what this means is that any kind of happiness that we have in our lives is actually suffering in the disguise of happiness. Because if it were to be happiness, it would have to be everlasting happiness. If it were to be true happiness, it would have to be everlasting, but that is not the case. For example, if someone were to praise us, we would immediately become very happy. But right after that, if someone else were to say some harsh words to us, then that sense of peace is gone right at that moment. Your mind is now troubled and you become unhappy. So that just shows the instability of our mind. So therefore, what we believe is that if you want true happiness, you cannot rely on the outward technology and things, but you instead have to work from within. You have to work with your mind. You have to train your mind, because no matter how rich you are, how well you're doing in society, it is the nature of people to never be content with what we have. First of all, if we're not rich, if we're not successful, we are always aiming to become better, to become more successful, more famous, more rich, and we have so many ambitions. And in these roller coaster of emotions or ambitions, there's no sense of peace. And once we do finally get what we want, once we do become famous or rich or successful in life, then we're not content with what we have. We want to become richer, we want to become more famous, and so there's no time for even the rich or the successful to enjoy what they have. So in that way, we believe sentient beings, and especially human beings, are always in a state of searching and not being in content with what they have. So therefore, if you want to be happy, you need to be content with what you have. And for that, you need to train your mind. If you can train your mind to be content, then even if you're poor, you can be happy. Even if you're rich, you can be happy. So that is the importance of Buddhism. The teachings of the Buddha teaches you to be content with what you have in our daily lives. And now for addressing the topic of staying motivated. The thing about staying motivated is that in our lives, we often underestimate our own abilities. And that is not a good thing, because it shuts the doors to so many possibilities in our lives. So therefore, what we need to do is that we need to have some courage. We should not underestimate ourselves. We should have courage. We should be a bit more daring. And we should especially support ourselves. The best supporter that you will have in your life is yourself. Of course, you have your parents, your friends, they will certainly support you. But if you cannot support yourself, no matter how much your friends or parents or your loved ones support you, it will not help you to move forward and to live a successful and happy life. So therefore, your best friend is yourself. And whether you are happy, that depends on your own actions. Whether you are sad or going to be unhappy, that is also dependent on your own actions. And the Buddha himself said that even when it comes to attaining enlightenment, he said that my job is to show you the path. Attaining liberation or not is up to you and solely yourself. So therefore, it is up to our own actions whether we are successful both in the spiritual life and in the ordinary worldly life. And as for the mindfulness meditation, this is very important, whether we are Buddhists or not. In our lives, we are almost always lost, either in the past or in the future, where we are never really living in the present moment. We're either thinking of the past, something that, past that we have so much regrets about, or the future we have so many ambitions. And of course we should have ambitions in life, but if you're just stuck in the future at all times, that is not healthy and that is not good, and it will do you no good by just being stuck in the future. And it's good to think about the past, as I mentioned, to understand the hardships which oneself has gone through, as well as others, such as one's parents and friends and all of that, especially the Tibetan community. But being completely stuck in the past will also do you no good. So we need to have a balance. We need to think about the past and the future, but we should not lose our sense of peace in the present moment. If you are not living in the present moment, then you are not truly living. Because to truly live, you need to be present, you need to be aware of the present moment. And so we have several techniques to help us with being mindful. One of the techniques that the Buddha taught, which can help us to be mindful, is to be aware of the intake and outtake of our breaths. So when you're breathing, you know you're breathing. When you're holding the breath, you know you're holding the breath. And when you're breathing out, you know you're breathing out. And in this way, if you can train your mind in such a way, you can be aware of the present moment. And you should give it a try. It is very effective, this meditation. You really start to notice very subtle things, things that usually go unnoticed, such as the movement of the trees and footsteps of the dogs and cats. Usually we hear so many sounds, but because our mind is usually lost and not in the present moment, we miss these very small but beautiful details in life. So you should give it a try. As for answering the topic on the Buddhist philosophy, emptiness and bodhicitta, this is very important. The main practice of what we call the Mahayana, or the greater vehicle, or the practice of the Bodhisattva, or the great compassionate one, is the practice of bodhicitta and emptiness. We all know about the fully enlightened Buddha, Shakyamuni, the great person who appeared who was born in Nepal but attained enlightenment in Bodh Gaya and taught the Dharma, shared the Dharma with all sentient beings. So we all know him by the name of the Buddha. But he wasn't just a person who appeared in this world who was truly miraculous and who just appeared in the world to sort of show off that he could attain enlightenment. That was not the purpose. The purpose of attaining enlightenment was for him to show us that if he can attain enlightenment, why can't we? So it is to encourage us onto the path of enlightenment. So the Buddha taught of a connection between cause and effect. And that is that if you create good causes, as a result you will experience happiness. If you create negative causes, as a result you will experience suffering. And this is the law of karma. It is what we call karma. So the Buddha, or you could say Siddhartha, Prince Siddhartha, did not just attain enlightenment out of luck. He had his causes as well, which led to his enlightenment. So the causes for his enlightenment, generally there are many causes, but the main two causes would be the practice of bodhicitta and the meditation on emptiness. So these two are very skillful methods to attain enlightenment and are essential methods. So what is bodhicitta? Bodhicitta is a Sanskrit word. It will be translated into English as the mind of enlightenment. And it is basically a thought. And what the thought is that one wishes to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And the reason why we wish to attain enlightenment, or the practitioner wishes to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings, is because we understand that all sentient beings, whether we know them personally or not, have at one point been one's own mother in a past life. And this is because we have taken on countless lives in the past. And each time we were born, in Buddhism we believe in rebirth. So each time we were born to parents. And we were born to our mother and father. And so we had a family in each of our lifetimes. And each time we were born to our mother was very kind to us because they first held us for many months in their womb. And after being born, they protected us from harm when we were not able to protect ourselves or look after ourselves because we are a baby. And when we do not know how to feed ourselves, the mother helps to feed us. And so in this way, the mother is very kind and has been very compassionate. And so therefore, we feel a special affection towards our mother and all mothers, which are basically all sentient beings. But we also understand their current state, which is that they are stuck in suffering. They are subject to suffering, and they are not freed from suffering because they have not abandoned the causes of suffering, which is ignorance, attachment, and hatred. These are the main causes for samsara. You could call it cyclic existence or suffering. So therefore, understanding this case, we feel pity for them, and we wish to help them. We wish to get rid of their suffering, to pull them out of their suffering. But we also know that in our current state, we are not in any position to help them because we ourselves are also subject to suffering. And someone who is suffering themselves cannot help someone else who is suffering. And by that, of course, you can help them in some small ways, but you cannot fully pull them out of their misery for good. So therefore, we understand that the only way to pull them out of their suffering would be to attain full enlightenment, just like Buddha Shakyamuni did. So in that way, we aspire to attain enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. And that thought is what we know, or what is referred to as Bodhichitta, or the mind of enlightenment. So this practice or thought is sort of like a compassionate aspect or practice. As for the meditation on emptiness, this is basically to understand the nature of all phenomena. We believe that on the relative level, everything that we see, everything appears. There are people, there are places, there are whatever we see in our lives, it is there, at least on the relative level. But on the ultimate level, when one examines when one examines very deeply into the nature of phenomena, we see that there is no true existence to whatever we see or perceive or believe there to be. So this may be a little bit confusing or a little bit difficult to understand, but that is fine. It is something which can be gradually understood with study and practice. So basically it is to understand the nature of phenomena, to not be attached to things as truly existent, to put it simply. So these two, compassion and wisdom, is essential. These are like two wings. For a bird to fly, they need two wings. Just by having one wing alone, they cannot fly into the air. They need two wings to fly up into the air. So likewise, in order to attain enlightenment, you cannot just have compassion and you cannot just have emptiness, but you need to have both the wings of compassion and wisdom. And because if you just have compassion, generally it is good, but you will not be able to free yourself from suffering. We believe that you will continue to be reborn in samsara, take birth again and again, but you will at least be obtaining good rebirths because the thought is a positive thought. But if you do not have wisdom, you cannot attain liberation at all. You cannot be free from suffering. But just by having wisdom alone, you cannot attain full enlightenment. So there's a little bit of difference to that. Usually, if you have wisdom but not compassion, then you can be free from suffering, but you will only be freeing yourself from suffering without any compassionate thoughts of helping others. But if you have both compassion and wisdom, then you can help yourself and others out of suffering. So that is the main point. And finally, to address death and dealings to a Buddhist view. So usually in our lives we do not think about death. We just think about the goals we want to achieve in our present life. And that is the only thing that we are likely occupied with. It is the business that we have to deal with in our present life. We will never really take time apart to give it a thought. What would happen? What happens after we die? Does one just disappear? Or there's a continuation? That area is very blurry or dark because we do not often think about it. We may even dread to think about it because we fear what lies beyond death. But according to Buddhism, death is not something that should be feared because it is a very natural process in life. What Prince Siddhartha saw, which encouraged him to set himself on the path to enlightenment, was the view of birth, old age, sickness, and death. When he escaped his palace and went into the city, he saw these four situations: that some people were being born, some were aging, some were getting sick, and some died. So this is the natural process for all humans. There's birth, old age, sickness, and death, and this whole process is full of suffering. And after you die, then it continues. It is like a wheel which is always in motion. Then again comes birth, old age, sickness, and death, and it happens again and again. So therefore, we do not need to fear it, but we should rather embrace it. But it would not be worth dying without having accomplished anything in our lives. We should at least die without having any regrets in our lives of doing something wrong or having not lived our lives wisely. A life wasted would be a pity. So therefore, when we die, we should not have any regrets, and we should make sure that we do not have any regrets while we are living. So therefore, while we're living, we should take the chance to do as much good as we can, because life is very short. It is certain that we will all die, but we never know when exactly, and that is the uncertainty of death. We all are living, but at the same time, although it looks like we are living, actually we are dying. When we say die, it doesn't need to mean like you collapse and your breath stops. Actually, as you all know, life is impermanent and time is changing at every moment, every second. And so therefore, we are dying at every second. In other words, you're not the same person as yourself from 5 minutes earlier. It is a continuation, but you're not the exact same person. You're always changing. There's always some change going on in your body and in your mind. And that is the continuation. We have a continuation in our lives. And so therefore, we are dying at every moment. And what we need to really remember is that at each and every moment, we are only getting closer to the actual moment of our death. We're not living longer, we're living shorter. We're running out of time. And this is the harsh truth in life, whether you like it or not. It is the truth. So we need to put whatever time we have left to good use. So it is not worth getting in fights with other people. It is not worth underestimating yourself, and it is not worth wasting your life on useless thoughts, overthinking. We should set a plan. We should set a goals to achieve in our lives, and to live our life wisely at every moment. So with this, I will conclude my talk. So thank you very much.
Sincere gratitude. Thank you so much, His Eminence Asanga Rinpoche. Now we'll transition into our moderated discussion that will be led by our fellow co-organizers. We have Yankila, Tsundala, and Tomola. Please take your seat. And I must say, as a young person myself, there were so many gems, as we call it. Rinpoche, thank you so much for covering a plethora amount of topics in such a short amount of time. I know some of us probably wanted a little deeper of a dive, and so I hope that our co-moderators will be diving a little deeper into some of the concepts and topics that you folks said that you're interested in. And even after that, after about 15 or 20 minutes of them asking the questions, if your topics have not been covered, you'll have an opportunity to ask questions as well. You can raise your hand and we'll take a couple of questions for another 20 minutes or so. If you would like your questions to be anonymous, again, there has been paper that has been circulating. Please feel free to write your questions. I'll come around and collect, and we'll try our best to get as many anonymous questions up as well. Okay? Well, without further ado, we'll have you folks take over the moderation session. Thank you.
Tashidale, my question is, so through your social media platforms, as well as past teachings, a lot of us have noticed that you have a lot of interest in the history of the Sakya tradition, as well as the lineage. So related to this interest, if you could tell us a little bit about the Sakya History Resources project that you have launched and are currently involved in, sort of a little bit about the purpose or the vision for the project, as well as why you picked this specific project.
So yes, I did start a project called Sakya History Resources. The main reason why I did that was because the Sakya tradition, which is a 950-year-old tradition, has a very rich history, which is yet unknown, very unknown to the West. And the reason why is because most of the historical records lies in the Tibetan language and has not really been fully translated or made available into foreign languages, especially such as English. And this is the main difficulty that we have. Once we are able to translate the historical records into English, then from English it would be very easy to translate it into other languages. But the first challenge that we have in this project is to translate it into from Tibetan into English. And so the Sakya history is very deeply woven into Tibetan culture, into Tibet's own history. And the reason why is because the masters from the Sakyapa tradition had contributed so much to the Tibetan cause many centuries back, especially with the appearance of Sakya Pandita Kunga Gyaltsen. He was one of the great pioneers or innovators of Tibet, and he actually started the movement of studying all of the great sciences or arts in Tibet, such as astrology, medicine, craftsmanship, Buddhism, epistemology, drama, or you could call it the opera house and all of that, and linguistics, language and linguistics, and so many arts. He started the movement for all Tibetans to study them in a complete manner. And so he was very kind to Tibet, and also he helped in averting the great damage caused by the Mongol invasion of Tibet. For those who know about Tibetan history, Tibet was conquered by the Mongols at one point, especially back in the 13th century. But it could have been worse if there wasn't Sakya Kunga Gyaltsen, because if he had not accepted the invitation of the Mongol Khan to travel to Lanzhou, which is currently situated in China, then the Mongols, which were at its peak at that time, the Mongol Empire, threatened to loot and destroy thousands of monasteries and kill thousands and thousands of civilians. And so the only way of averting that was for Sakya Pandita to accept the invitation to go to the Khan's court and to serve as the Khan's teacher. And so in that way, several members from the Sakya tradition, such as Sakya Pandita, Kunga Gyaltsen, contributed to Tibet in many great ways, made many great contributions by saving the lives of many Tibetans. And also after that, if we look at that time period, the first power, the ruling power over Tibet was the Tibetan Empire, and from that we have many great kings such as King Nyati Tsembo, King Songtsen Gampo, Chisong Detsen, Chirapachen, and such great emperors or kings. But after the fall of the Tibetan Empire, Tibet was fragmented with no ruling power. And so it was the Sakyapas who, during the time of the Mongols, reunited Tibet into one country once again. And so it was for about a century, nearly a century, from between the 13th to 14th century, that the Sakyapas ruled over Tibet, and especially from the Kern family. And so that started with Jogun Chögyal Palpa, the imperial preceptor of Emperor Kublai Khan, the Khan of the Yuan dynasty. So you could say that Chögyal Palpa and Sakya Pandita were the first people to introduce Tibetan Buddhism outside of Tibet, and especially to China and Mongolia. And because Emperor Kublai Khan was the ruler or the emperor of the Yuan dynasty, which was a very large superpower in Asia, within the Yuan dynasty there was Tibet, there was Mongolia, there was China, and even Korea. And so because Kublai Khan appointed Chögyal Palpa as the imperial preceptor of the Yuan dynasty, as well as the president of the Bureau of Buddhist and Tibetan Affairs. In other words, Chögyal Palpa was the spiritual head of not only Tibetan Buddhism, but also the spiritual head of Chinese Buddhism, Mongolian Buddhism, and Korean Buddhism at that time. And so in that way, the Sakyapas greatly contributed and spread the Tibetan teachings of loving kindness and compassion to foreign lands. And also, when we look back at history, there were many wars which Tibet went with other countries, such as Tibet went to war with the Gurkhas or the Nepalis. Tibet also went to war with the Bhutanese. And there were many wars, and in most of these wars, it was the Sakyapas who served as the mediator between the wars to bring peace between both sides. So the Sakyapa masters have been very kind to the Tibetan cause. And so this is not just, the history of the Sakya tradition is not just important to the followers of the Sakyapa, but to all Tibetans, and also many Asians of other countries. So therefore, I thought it would be very important and wonderful if people could know more about it.
Tujana, as you know, we live in a society where social media has now become such a huge part of our lives. And while there are positive benefits to social media, there are many unrealistic expectations through various platforms. So many of the youths have expressed their anxieties having to live in a society, in this current society. And one of the biggest challenges they face is constantly having to compare themselves to others. And I know you addressed this a little bit in the intro, but if you could, from a Buddhist practice, what advice would you have for young people struggling with this? Yeah.
Well, yes, for many of us who use social media and see many other people showing off their very luxurious lifestyle, we cannot help but to compare ourselves with them. And this brings a sense of maybe anxiety, depression, and insecurity. But we really need to think about it. Does it really help us? We need to take a moment to just calm down a bit and see, is it really beneficial? Is there any good outcome, positive outcome from comparing ourselves with others? Why can you not be content with who you are? Because you yourself are very unique. Why need to compare yourself with others? There's no one out there who is like you. The only person who is like you is you yourself. So you're very special and unique. So why try to copy others when you can be yourself to feel comfortable in your own shoes and clothes and in your own skin? So I think we just really need to take a moment to see if all this overthinking, does it really make sense? Is it really worth it?
I think I wanted to continue the conversation around mental health that you already addressed wonderfully in your opening remarks. And I actually really appreciate how you addressed that. That is a topic that was of interest to many people who registered, and many young people are struggling with it. And naturally, when we're struggling, we seek our parents' guidance because they're the closest people to us, and oftentimes we hear our parents asking us to nangchujang, nangchuche, study Tibetan Buddhism, practice Buddhism, and we recognize why our parents rely on Tibetan Buddhism, because if we look at all the hardships that they went through over the last few decades, their absolute faith in Buddhism really, I think, incredibly explains why they've been so resilient and why we are thriving. But I think the context of young Tibetans, particularly in the West, is quite different. There is a shift away from unquestioned faith, and especially living in the West, a society that is capitalist, where quote-unquote secular values are celebrated. So that is the context in which young Tibetans live, and I think that to some extent explains why there is that disconnect between young Tibetans and Tibetan spiritual practice. So I wanted to, I'm curious to learn how you see this and how we can sort of create different conditions in which young Tibetans can tap into this precious Buddhist teachings when we're actually struggling.
Well, I think it would be good or important to differentiate the Tibetan Buddhist culture and the actual Tibetan Buddhism, or Buddhist practice. There's a bit of a difference. The culture is what we see on the outward appearance. But the actual Tibetan Buddhism, which we really need, is something which is not on the outward, but rather something to develop within ourselves and our minds. So, therefore, this makes it very possible, because now that it's not an outward thing anymore, it's an actually inward thing. Whatever environment you are in, whether it's a Tibetan environment or a Western environment, the practice is a state of the mind, so it doesn't really rely on the outward appearance too much. So what in Buddhism we do is that we do not force you to become a Buddhist. Just being born in a Buddhist family does not make you a Buddhist. This is important to know. It is you only become a Buddhist if you take refuge in the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. And that depends on your own will or motivation and wish. No one can really force you. And in Buddhism does not encourage others to force, people to force others to become a Buddhist. The Buddha himself said that you should examine my words carefully. Do not simply accept what I said just out of mere reverence for me, but examine it, see if it is correct or not. And if by examining it, if you are not comfortable, if you do not think it is correct, then you do not need to necessarily accept what I have said. If you find it to be correct, then you can accept it. So this is what the Buddha said. So I hope that answers it.
Rinpoche. My next question is around death, and you already again addressed it in your opening remarks. I wanted to share a fear and anxiety that many in my generation, within my peers, are experiencing, which is the anxiety around the fact that Kundu is aging, our parents' generation, they're aging, and there is this looming anxiety thinking about that loss, not just of that support and that anchor figures in our life, but also anxiety around the responsibility that comes on our shoulder when that day comes, which inevitably will come. So I'm curious, as a young spiritual leader yourself, I'm curious to know if you also experience any kind of anxiety, particularly given the fact that you're a young leader, and anxiety around having to continue this lineage. So, and how do you overcome that if you do?
Well, that is kind of why I started my project, Sake History Resources. Again, it comes back to that. It is because I understand that times are changing, and the people from old Tibet are now getting very old, and many of them have already left us, and many of them are still with us, but at a very delicate age or state. And so, yes, it is inevitable that we will lose all of the older generation, and all of the responsibility of continuing or passing down the Tibetan culture will come down upon us, the younger generation. And so that is why, for myself, I started this project, so that I could know how things worked in the past. So if you have a good understanding of how things worked in the past, you'll know how you should move on forward. That is why I did that. And yes, it is good to understand that, of course, none of us want to think about it. It's not a pleasant thought, but yes, Kundin will not be with us forever. And many of our grandparents or parents, if they're still living, will also not be with us forever. And so that is why it is good to notice that this should not go unnoticed. But just simply worrying about it alone, that will not help. Understanding that situation, you should feel or understand that you have the responsibility to carry on what they have passed down to you. So therefore, it comes back to living a very good life. You should not waste your time. While the elders are still with you, you should stay close to them. You should learn from them. Everyone, every family, every elder generation has a story to tell. You could conduct an interview, write down any of the stories they have to pass down, and your own children and offsprings will learn from whatever you write down. Because if you do not take the initiative to write down what they have to share, then with them gone, whatever hardships, information, stories they have to share is also gone with them, and it will be forever gone. You cannot get that back. So therefore, live a very skillful, you could say, life. Do not waste any moment. And you do not need to worry too much. This is how life is. For so many centuries in Tibet, all the cultures, it wasn't just kept up by one generation. It was successfully passed down from one generation to another. And if it wasn't successfully passed down up until now, we would not have what we have here. So if they could do it, why can't we?
Thank you, Rinpoche. So in lieu of time, we'll move on to the question and answer sessions. We have quite a few questions here. I have collected some anonymous questions here. If anybody wants to ask a question directly to Rinpoche, please raise your hand or step forward. Anybody?
Oh my God,
Yeah.
I had to stand up. Oh my God.
It's on.
Tashle, how can we live and enjoy the present while also preparing for the future?
Well, we need to have do the goal setting. We need to have goal settings and write down. You can create a PDF if you're using a laptop. If you're using a notebook, just write down anything you want to do in your life, sort of your bucket list, and things you want to do in this year, things you want to do within 2 years, or however you want to put it down. And then once it's down there, then you can make changes to it time to time. But if you're always just thinking about your future goals, then of course that's not healthy. You're not living in the present moment. So as long as you have it there in writing, you can take it out, check it time to time.
So we'll take 2 live questions in a row, and then Rinpoche, if you could address both the questions, that would be faster of a process, and we'll ask the anonymous questions.
Hello, Tashle Rinpoche. In my life, I have met many people who see life as a life full of suffering, and they always claim that they have a worse life than others. But I've also met people who live life in a very positive manner, like they live their life with no thoughts of suffering at all. My question is that if life is just suffering, why is it that some of us don't see it in that way? And why do some of us see life as wonderful rather than suffering? And what advices do you have for the ones who see life as full of suffering? Thank you.
Can you please say your name and your age first?
My name is Tenzin Yudre and I'm 18.
Thank you. And we have another question right here. We'll do 2 questions.
My name is Kunga and I'm 8 years old.
Wonderful. What's your question?
What should you do when you're mad?
Great question.
All right, very good questions. So first, to answer Tenzin Yudren's question, Well, it does kind of come back to being content or not with your life. Usually the people who are always drowning in suffering are those who are not content with what they have. But if to be content, you can start to compare yourself with others. But this is not in the social media kind of way. It's to compare it in a more healthy way. There's a way to do that. So if you think you are suffering, that there's no person that is more suffering than oneself out there, like I'm the worst person suffering in the world, then you can think or compare yourself to someone who is suffering more than you. You can think about the beggars on the street who do not have a shelter, a roof above their head, who do not have enough clothes to keep warm during the winter, and who do not have the basic living necessities. So if you can compare yourself to them, you'll start to understand that, oh, I'm doing much better than them in life, so I should not really be beating myself with all these I'm poor, I'm suffering, and all these kind of thoughts. And so I think that helps. As I said, all of the happiness that we have in our lives is not really everlasting happiness. It's not the true happiness, but it is still momentary happiness, and it is still something we need to work to work on. So I think if we can understand that, we can deal with that. And as for the question on how to not be mad, how not to be angry, well, in Buddhism we have an antidote. To each problem there is a remedy, an opposite of that problem. And the remedy or the opposite of anger is loving kindness. So what is anger? Anger is the thought of being unhappy and wanting to harm others in some way, either verbally, to say something bad to them, to maybe fight with them. That is what anger is all about. On the other hand, loving kindness is a thought in which you wish for others to be happy. So these two thoughts are direct opposites of each other. They're polar opposites. And in the mind process, there cannot be two thoughts at the same time. So you either have anger or you have loving kindness. So if you can replace your angry thoughts with thoughts of love, loving kindness, then there will not be anger.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So we have collected quite a few anonymous questions. I picked two which are dealing with the concept of emptiness. I'm just going to read them out together. The first one says, emptiness is beyond duality. There is no good nor bad. Then why Buddha teaches us to do morally good things to accumulate merits? That's the first one. And the second one says, Rinpoche, I do see the table is right here, tangible, but Dharma says everything is empty. Could you please explain how to see those physical items as emptiness, or why emptiness?
So the Buddha did teach about two truths. It is called the relative truth and the ultimate truth. In the relative truth, there is suffering, there is karma, there is people, there are emotions, there's everything. Everything there is that we know about, it's all there in the relative truth. But in the ultimate truth, we believe that there is nothing which truly exists, that there's no elaborations. It is free of duality, free of elaborations and mental conceptions. So when we say that everything is empty, we are not denying that we have a life, that there's karma, there's people, there's good and bad karma, and that we're not denying that there's a table. Everything is there on the relative level, but on the ultimate level, it does not truly exist. And I will answer how that works. I'll answer the second question, connecting that to the first. So this is what we know as a table. This is a table. But what makes this a table? It is a collection of different parts. It is a collection of different parts which makes this table. If none of these parts came together, it would not be a table. If there was no screwdriver, it would not probably stick together, and it would not be a table. Maybe a better or easier example would be to talk about a car. So a car has many parts. It has the steering wheel, it has the four wheels, it has the seats, it has the roof, it has everything, all of the mechanisms in there. But if all of those parts were scattered and not put together, then where is the car? Is the wheel the car? Is the steering wheel the car? Is the seat the car? You cannot point to what the car is when it's all different parts on its own. But only when it comes together, then we label it as a car. So in a way, a car is a mental conception when it comes to investigating or delving into the ultimate truth.
Thank you, Rinpoche. So we have one more audience question here and another one there. So I'm going to come to you first. Please give your name and, if possible, your age.
Rinpoche, my name is Pema. And today afternoon, when Rinpoche was giving us a teaching about Buddha and Dharma, he gave us a very elaborate example about a doctor, medicine, and a patient. So over the past few centuries, there was a huge change in the medical science, and also like how doctors treat a patient. So I was wondering, do we need any change in our Buddhism philosophy, like a medical science, or do we at least need any changes in how Buddhism is being taught to the younger generation so that it will stay relevant to the time?
Deshile Rinpoche, my name is Tenla, I'm 18 years old. And my question is, what guidance can Buddhism offer regarding the addictive nature of technology and the challenges it poses to maintaining a balanced and present mind? This is something me and my friends, we all suffer from, just addicted to technology. So how can we overcome this through a Buddhist standpoint?
So first of all, yes, when we speak about the Buddha, Dharma, and the Sangha, we compare it to the doctor, the medicine, and the assisting nurses in a hospital. So we say that the Buddha is similar to a doctor. A doctor's work is to treat the patient, and that is the doctor's work. So we consider ourselves as the patient. A doctor's patient is ill, and that is why they need to be treated. They have any sort of illnesses. So that is why they are treated. And so likewise, we need to be treated because we are also ill. We are ill with the poisons, the three poisons, which His Holiness mentioned earlier, which are ignorance, attachment, and hatred, or you could call it anger. So these three poisons we have at all times. It is why we are always suffering. These are the troublemakers. So that is what needs to be treated. That is the sickness. The Buddha is like the doctor because the doctor prescribes the medicine to the patient. And likewise, the Buddha, understanding the special needs of each and every sentient being, prescribes them, you could say, a special teaching suited for their needs. And so that is why he is like the doctor. And so the Buddha is like the doctor, the Dharma is like the medicine. Because just like the medicine can help you get rid of your illness, the Dharma can help you get rid of those three poisons. And the Sangha are the companions. Just like in a hospital, we would need assisting nurses to help the patient to recover. Likewise, in the path of the Dharma, we need companions. If you're just practicing alone, you have no companions, it will be very challenging. But instead we have a community to share our practices with, to improve together. It is basically like a teamwork. So that is why it's important to have, and why it can be compared to the doctor, the medicine, and the nurse. As for does it need to be changed? Well, generally, the teachings of the Buddha do not really need to be changed because it is very, relevant to our personal needs and nowadays. Whatever he taught, it still continues. He said life is full of suffering and we are still suffering. So that hasn't changed. So it doesn't really need to be changed. But yes, you could say that the way the Buddhist teachers present the Dharma to others, how we introduce the Dharma to others, how the Buddhist practitioners set an example for others to follow would need to be changed. We can always do better. I'm not saying we're not doing good right now, but we can always work harder to help spread the teachings of the Buddha with others. So I hope that answers that. And then for the social media thing, I think, yes, it would be sort of connected with what I said earlier. We need to understand that life is ever-changing. We are moving towards our death at every moment. We are losing time. So social media, it has its pros and cons, its advantages and disadvantages. You should maybe follow what you would consider as essential for your own needs, what you think can somehow have a positive impact on your life. And then there are a lot of toxic things you might see on social media. You should block those, hide them away. I think that would be good.
I say thank you so much, Rinpoche. We will end with the last question. It is an anonymous question again, and it says, Dear Rinpoche, thank you for coming. And you were born in such a huge family. And do you ever have any worries about anything in life or general? And also, if you could just describe how your daily day goes by. And you are pretty young, if I may add as well. And yeah, how does your daily go? And you've achieved so much in your life already, so thank you.
Well, I don't think there's anything amazing about my life, first of all. I'm always trying to improve myself, to work harder at all times. The good thing about it is that I love what I'm doing. Nobody told me to do this history project. It's not forced. Whatever I do in life, I make my own decisions. And I think that's how it should be. We should, of course, it doesn't mean, making your own decisions doesn't mean to not listen to your parents at all and be sort of aggressive and not a good child and all of that, and lock your door and just be inside hidden. That's not what it means, but you should listen to them, what they have to share. Everyone has opinions to share, suggestions, and if they share good suggestions which can improve your life, then that's great. You happily accept those, thank them for their suggestions. If they don't share any good suggestions, you don't need to fight with them or have any dispute with that. You can just sort of filter it out. So in that way, you have a lot of choices. The more suggestions you hear from others, the more they share with you, you have more choices or paths to think about in life. And that's the good thing about being open-minded. So be more open-minded, listen to others' opinions, make the final decision yourself, and that's very important. And so in my case, I love doing history. I just sort of see that it's a topic which is not very touched upon, and it has so many, I think that the Tibetan community in general, and not just Tibetans, but the whole world can benefit from the history of Sakya, so that's why I chose to pursue that path of researching into the history of Sakya. And as for my life, I'm currently in what we call a Shedar, so it's a Tibetan Buddhist college. It is quite different from the Western colleges, because in the Tibetan Buddhist college, you would have to stay for maybe 10 years or maybe 20 years at the most. In my case, I'm now in my 10th year in college. So I started my college in 2013 at the age of 14, and now I am 24, just turned, sort of. And so I'm now in my last year. I'm going to be completing my traditional Tibetan Buddhist studies next year. And I have plans, because I do the goal setting thing, as I mentioned earlier. So I have plans such as applying to universities. I've already actually applied to a university in London to further pursue my studies. So that is sort of the plan. I don't know if you wanted a daily schedule of what I do. But basically, the life of a Lama, it involves mainly practicing, because without practicing the Dharma, you would not be really in a good position to teach the Dharma to others. If you want to have others practice the Dharma, you first need to set an example yourself. So you need to practice the Dharma yourself, and only then would it be appropriate to share the Dharma with others. I'm not saying that I am a good practitioner, but of course I try. So it involves waking up early in the morning. We have several practices in the Sakyapa tradition, basically practice manuals, which we have to practice daily. It cannot be interrupted. So most of the masters in the Sakyapa tradition, you'll find that they wake up maybe at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. and during the practices, they'll maybe complete most of the practices by 7 a.m. And then after that, they will do whatever work they need to. So in my case, I do the sadhanas, or the practice manuals in the morning, and then have breakfast. And since I'm a college student, I don't really need to go around teaching much. I'm usually just in the college, so I attend classes in the morning. And then in the college, we need to debate. So you see monks clapping their hands, and it's sort of like a mind exercise. So we do that. And it's just mainly receiving teachings and doing debating in college. But later on, once that's done, once all of the study work is done, once that is passed, then the actual work that that falls upon me would, of course, be to continue doing the sadhanas or the practice, the manuals in the very early morning. But after that, it is mainly to travel, to teach the Dharma to others, to meet people, tend to their needs. A Tibetan Buddhist master would do divination, because people have options in their lives. They don't know which one to pursue. So the masters do that, such as His Holiness the 41st Sakya Kumartija Rinpoche. Many thousands of Tibetans go to him. He performs a divination, and nowadays the question which most people in India would ask the Guru or Lama would be, should I go to America or should I go to Europe? Will I get a visa or will I not get a visa? So these are the kind of questions that the Lamas hear nowadays, but they still do the divination. And usually, if the Lama is good and it's done in the right way, the divination turns out to be very accurate. And so that is one of the Lama's works, and the Lama needs to bestow empowerments, all transmissions, explanatory teachings. And also, before giving empowerments, the Lama also has to go through intense meditative retreats. So, based on different Buddhas or deities, the Lama has to go to 1 month of retreat, or 3 months of retreat, or 6 months of retreat, or sometimes even 3 years of retreat. And so during that time, they cannot go outside of their home. They cannot meet outside. They cannot meet people. They cannot look at the sky. They cannot look at the sun. Everything is shut down. It's like a lockdown. So it is perhaps many of you might have had a taste of that from the COVID lockdown. So it is quite similar to that, but it's instead of just sitting inside doing nothing really important, you're doing actual Dharma practice, which is beneficial for oneself and others. So that is sort of the difference. So yeah, that is the work of the Lama.
Rinpoche, Tujiche, thank you so much for this engaging Q&A session. I think this is one of the rare moments where we've had an opportunity to engage with a young spiritual leader who has engaged with us with great acknowledgement of our complex realities. And I think that really set the tone for young people to be able to openly raise questions with you. So thank you so much to you, and also to everyone who brought their incredible questions. So before we wrap up, we have a very quick video about Sakya Khongma Teacher Rinpoche's deeds. We're going to quickly play that and we'll wrap up the event. Can we have the video on projection?
Kiam Gui Goma, teaching Doji Chang Choki, Sansung Zebe, Mojo Jemdu.
One of the main objectives of the North American Sakya World Peace Milam Foundation is to organize the annual religious gathering for universal peace and harmony. Based on Their Holinesses' noble wishes, the Milam Foundation strives to enhance the understanding or knowledge of those who have faith and devotion to the Buddha Dharma in general and Sakya tradition in particular. Specifically, the foundation aims to introduce Buddha's teachings